India's national elections have come to a close and the votes are ready to be counted. In the midst of the election process, Time magazine put India's Prime Minister Modi on its cover and called him the country's divider-in-chief. So what are the results of 5 years of Modi's leadership? And what will happen if he's given another 5 years? To find out, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by Atul Aneja, Associate Editor of The Hindu, Rong Ying, Vice President and Senior Research Fellow with the China Institute of International Studies, and Xu Qinduo, Senior Fellow of the Pangoal Institution. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Ray. First, Atul, you're from India. What do you think of Time magazine doing this in the middle of this election process? And second, what do you think of the substance of the allegation in the article in the magazine?
I think it's highly exaggerated what Time magazine did. Obviously, it's very clear that Modi follows is a very independent-minded leader and is not really in what we in India say the Nehruvian mold, which was Fabian socialism, and quite in a way adjusted to the Western narrative of the Anglo-Saxon world. And Modi is one person who is very eclectic. I mean, he looks at India's interests and is therefore keen to engage with all. So he does not necessarily follow the Western or the Anglo-Saxon agenda. And I think it's a blowback because of that. And as we have seen right after the collapse of the Soviet Union, I don't think the West likes independent-minded countries. It doesn't like independent-minded leaders. But having said that, there is some substance in the sense that Modi, because of domestic policies, did go ahead to project a strong, not constitutionally but socially, a strong sense of Hinduism, which with India's large Muslim population was in a way a divisive factor. But that doesn't explain the totality of the situation. I think the former point is more important.
Thank you for giving us a more precise picture about domestic politics in your country. Mr. Rong Ying, do you think an independent Modi administration after the election will be more of an opportunity for the United States and the West, or more of a threat? Because India has been regarded in the strategy of Indo-Pacific framework as the most influential swing vote between Beijing and Washington.
I'm not sure whether it will be an opportunity or threat for the United States, but definitely it will be an opportunity for India, as my India colleagues have said very closely, correctly. I think if you look at the past 5 years, and at the very beginning when Modi was when Modi won the election, there were in the Western media some sort of apprehension or skepticism, because given his sort of his track record on relations with dealing with the Muslim population
in Gujarat.
Yeah, in Gujarat and others. And then later on, then there was kind of hyper expectation that India would do something, particularly in the sense that play a role like counterweight to China. And by the end of the administration, 5 years, there are another sort of, so I thought it was a kind of a disappointment, if I can say, from the Western media, that it seems that India has, or Prime Minister Modi has not done, or not, do in a way that they had expected. So India has always, by the way, being an independent sort of nation, and always very proud of the strategic autonomy. So India will continue, whatever, which party, whatever comes to power, whoever comes to power, either Modi, Prime Minister Modi win the election, and India will continue to be play a role.
Given the roller coaster expectations of Western media about India, and given the size and charm of both the population and the political institutions in India, do you think that the potential of India will always remain a myth to be substantiated, forever remain a myth?
I think given time, the potential for Indian development will be fully exploited. If you look at the infrastructure development in that country, you can sense a booming economy. I have no doubts that in the huge potential for the overall development of the economy, and given the number of the young people in that country, you know there's a bright future. And if you talk to the educated young people, you see how bright and how optimistic they are looking at their own country. And I think India will definitely be another polar in terms of the multi-polar system.
By the way, Atul, what's the size of the aging population? I mean, what's the size of the working? What's the size of the population of aging working age? Sorry for putting this.
Well, I can
way.
put it the other way. 70% are young people below 30. So now
70%.
70%
below the age of 30.
Below the age of 30. So that gives a tremendous amount of demographic dividend to India. Now, actually, when Modi came to power, I think that was what it is. That how do you convert this human capital, this demographic dividend into actual skills which are employable and can sort of help the economy to grow?
It's exactly my next question, too. China is able to provide 10 million jobs on average for the past few years. If the formidable size of young labor force could not be cast into working force, then it could be a huge number of unemployed people,
sure.
And that would cause a lot of social instability and perhaps the ouster of whoever is in the position of Modi next time. Qinduo, what do you think of, say, the issue of unemployment for India? Because you've been talking about the promise of such a young labor force.
Well, I was at like an industrial park of, I think it's infosystem over there. You see how well managed this park and how many young people are employment in that park. And I think as long as the economy is growing at this recent speed of more than 7%, I think jobs will be created. It's really about which sector. Some people have questioned about like India should develop focus more on the industrial, in the infrastructure construction so as to create more jobs. Somehow industrial projects has become a bottleneck of the country's economic development. India is more strong in terms of software development, but somehow a bit weak infrastructure or the hardware development. But as I think it's clear over there for the government, I don't see, yes, there's a challenge to a certain degree, but it's not something that's hindering the country's development.
To what are the major issues that have been challenged by his opposition candidate, Rahul Gandhi?
Yeah. It's more focused on the economic side, because you do have, the figures show that unemployment has actually increased in the last 5 years during Mr. Modi's tenure, which is very significant. Second thing is, in terms of manufacturing, Mr. Modi had promised so much during the early phase of his government that India will have a manufacturing revolution through his Make in India program. Unfortunately, that has not been realized the way he perhaps visualized it. Third was what the point you made about skilling India, because you have this demographic dividend. How do you do it in terms of employable people? He had the Skill India program. So the framework has all laid out of how to turn around the Indian economy from 7 to 8 to 10%. In the initial phase of his, if he wins elections, we are assuming that, I think he would have to focus on the economy and on employment issues and take unpopular steps, because he will not be under pressure in the beginning of his tenure to win another election. So he has this golden period of a couple of years, but I think it's essential that he gets back fully and strongly into the economic agenda. And I think there Chinese investment will be one of the factors. We can talk about it later.
On his campaign trail, Rong Ying, Mr. Modi seems to successfully divert public attention from issues of economic underperformance to national security. However, at the same time, he is the representative of Hindus, which accounted for 80% of the population. But what about the minority voices? Muslims, they are so scared because of his track record in his home state of Gujarat. And for that, he was deprived of his visa by the State Department of the US government. Of course, that was reversed very quickly after he took office. So what do you think of religious disputes that would always serve to divide the country?
Well, I think to be fair, the question, I mean, the communal issues or the relationship between the minority ethnic groups or religious groups like Muslims and others with the majority sort of group like the Hindus and other, has always been the problem. Not only for I mean, Prime Minister Modi or for BJP, but also for all the previous, I mean, the administration that being a big issue that they had to manage. And what caused attention or our concern of I mean, both inside and outside India is because of BJP per se. I mean, his mandate. I mean, this vision. I mean, it's a history that there's always a kind of a concern, always a kind of expectation that either they would be managed well, or that would become a problem, a political issue. So it is. I would say rather it is more a political issues. Having said that, it is true, I think, if you look at the press report, look at the sort of the concerns expressed and the reports of cases like that, there have been some cases, I mean, becoming more sort of catching more eyes. So all in all, I think this is a big issue. This is a big issue if we touch upon India's sort of very nature of India as a nation, the secularism and the way and how to manage, I mean, the so-called the majoritarianism and the minoritarian relationship. Yeah. But I think, to be fair, I have to say that given the track record of BJP and given that this issue has not bad.
I think it cannot, because there are institutional checks and balances. So long as the Constitution of India, which is a secular liberal constitution, holds, and to make changes in that, you need at least a 2/3 majority to make amendments to the Constitution. So Constitution will remain. The other institutions, like the judiciary, the press, for example, you asked me about what the campaign of the opposition was. One of them was this divisive communal agenda, and they were vigorously debating it. So long as there is a strong civil society and there is the Indian Constitution, which I do not see any chance of a government to change that, I do not think that the communal issue on a national scale is really going to be the most important issue.
A long-time observer, Qinduo, what's the first impression that you got from the so-called chaotic democratic election in India, a sizable population there? They spend, well, what's the budget of the spending for the campaign?
This one?
$7 billion. $7 billion US dollars.
Yeah.
Very expensive for this underdeveloped country. 900 million people turn out. That's a big turnout for whatever democracy. So, Qinduo, what is your first impression about the results of the democracy?
It's created a lot of jobs. At least temporarily, remember?
It's part of the GDP growth.
Right. And a lot of investment over there. But that's the India system everybody accepts and take it as it is. And if you talk to the people from the media, they are very excited and very enthusiastic in terms of their practice over there. So obviously it's a different system. It's a system like with the Indian characteristics, you can say, yes, in a sense. And so this is how India conducts its elections. It's not like say Australia. You say it's quick. It's a much smaller population, 24 million people. But here it's much larger. It takes much longer time.
It seems Atul is not very happy about the Western media coverage about your politics, but Bloomberg editorial puts forward the worry that Modi will shift attention further from the economy and more towards nationalism. Is that true?
I doubt it.
You doubt it?
I doubt it. First thing, in this particular election, despite what the exit polls say, I do not think Modi is coming with that kind of a majority where he sets the agenda. He's likely to have more alliance partners, so that itself is a break, even if he has the intention to set forth his majority agenda, which I doubt he really has. India being so multicultural and with so many other social divides, if you go ahead with this agenda and with sizable populations, you are sitting on a social time bomb. Modi is smart enough not to be doing that. And internationally too, now it's Bloomberg and others, if there is a further tendency, he loses friends across the world. So I do not see any solid reason for Bloomberg to come to this very hasty and a big conclusion so early on. I would go back to my previous point. Despite all the faults of Prime Minister Modi, I do think he's an independent-minded man, and if he becomes a statesman, that's not good for the West. So I do see a pattern in this. We have Time magazine, you have economists, you have Bloomberg, almost talking the same language. I think they've taken their position on Modi, and the smear campaign is going on. I hope Mr. Modi does not give them further chances to carry this campaign further.
Yes, indeed. He gives China the impression of being charismatic, a very popular leader in our neighboring country of India. But Rong Ying, what do you think of the setbacks and success of his economic reform? Because that will eventually vote him into a position of being the most popular leader since the independence, right?
Indeed, I think if you look at the economic sort of microeconomic sort of figures, you see the GDP growth rate as being, I think, the highest, right? And major lot of sort of reports by international institutions that also predict that India would continue to have enjoy that kind of high rate of growth. Remember, I mean, India is the size of economy and the potentiality. So I think if Modi will continue, or India will continue to do like that, then it will be possibly, I mean, the second sort of most successful story of a big country rising, and in a way with India characteristics. So this is very much significant. But having said that, India has the big challenges ahead. As the economy grows, as the sort of people are getting rich, there are losers. So winners and losers are all growing in numbers. So the gap, the disparity are growing. So I think on the one hand, as Modi, if he wins the election, or I mean India does, if they continue to enjoy, should work hard to enjoy sort of high growth rate, the major issues, the major challenges would how to ensure the benefits of that growth would be equitable, inclusive, bringing more to the average people. That would decide politically that whether the party would win the election, because it is literally talking about the votes. But more importantly, it would mean that whether India would continue to enjoy, I mean, a sustainable. By the way, there are other issues, environment challenges, social issues, and other. But I think, for me, I think that equitable, inclusive growth is possibly the most important thing. Yeah.
Well, many major economies have been required by the Trump administration to cut off their economic cooperation with Iran. But a second look at the trade war between Washington and Beijing, Qinduo, do you believe India is likely to become a beneficiary? It will be one of the winners due to the trade disputes between Washington and Beijing.
Well, I would say there are countries they are actually benefiting from the trade war between Beijing and Washington. Obviously, for example, some of the factories are shifting out of China to Vietnam, to Bangladesh, to Malaysia, some other countries, including India. But overall, long-term point of view, everybody suffers from such a kind of a trade war as it intensifies. For example, the U.S. has cut off the supplying of the products, the parts and fire to Huawei. So that kind of action, very extreme action by the United States, is disrupting the international supply. Remember, Huawei is, we call it a Chinese company. Huawei is a global company, it's a multinational company. It has suppliers around the world, 93 major suppliers around the world. So such irresponsible behavior by Washington is disrupting the supply chain, global supply chain. So in that sense, major economies will suffer.
Atul, your authoritative voice about whether you'll be the winner or loser?
No, look, I do not like the term trade war, because this is not a trade war.
What's the alternative label?
This is a reassertion of U.S. hegemony, period. And it's a multi-spectrum kind of a operation, where economy is one of the things, media will be another, ideology is another. So this is much more than a trade war. And if you take the earlier point, that India has the strategic autonomy doctrine, which means we will not fall into this trap of new hegemony which is being sought to be created. So I do not see a very bright future for India and the US that you can take advantage of the problems between China and India and benefit out of it. I think in the long term, and in fact in the medium term, we'll have to stand together, hang together, because there is this reassertion of hegemony, and India and China will have to just come together to counter it. I think alone we may not be able to do that.
Well, as long as the India economy continues to grow in a sustainable manner, it will be like, I don't know, like 10 years later, so India will be the country, probably Washington will say, the top threat to the US national security.
Look, I think even India, Korea, and frankly even Japan in the long run. We have to watch out here, the Abe-Xi Jinping equation, what's going to happen at the G20 meeting. The world is in such a flux right now.
Yes.
So I do not see the US right now winning many hearts and minds and many friends, especially in our region.
But definitely, Secretary Pompeo deserves credit for being the most diligent foreign minister. Look at his globe-trotting agenda. Everywhere he would say China is a threat. He's exhausted all means in bad-mouthing China. But latest development concerning bilateral relationship between Islamabad and New Delhi. Atul, how effectively are the recently flaring tensions with Pakistan being managed, and where are relations heading right now?
Well, right now the relations are in a bad shape, to be very honest.
Very bad shape.
Yeah, between India and Pakistan.
Do you think China will be left quite embarrassed?
Not at all.
Not at all?
I think China has a role to play here because we in India recognize that if we have a problem with terrorism coming out of Pakistan, but we do not have a problem with the Pakistani state, minus the issue of terrorism. And we know Pakistan is a nuclear weapon state. So I think the balance of terror, to use the old Cold War term, itself will determine that the tensions between India and Pakistan cannot spill over beyond a certain point. If the terrorism issue, and that's where China comes into play, the designation of Masood Azhar was a very, very important thing to have happened. And if we can get that down, I do see a new round of engagement between India and Pakistan, and China having a joint interest in the peace between these two countries. I think the SCO becomes a very important forum here, where both India and Pakistan are members. I do think that there are people who are thinking about activating track 2 diplomacy between India and Pakistan, but it's still, you know, we have the nuts and bolts right now for a better relationship. But I think the dismantling of terror infrastructure in Pakistan will be vital. Once that happens, India will have all the incentive to go ahead and engage with Pakistan. If you recall, even at the Qingdao SCO summit, there was talk about India gaining transit through Pakistan into Afghanistan and then the Belt and Road countries. So, you know, we have positive agendas as well with Pakistan. Plus, we share a very strong cultural history together. So, it can turn around, but we have to do these particular pieces have to be moved first. Pakistan
definitely benefits enormously from China's Belt and Road Initiative. If you look at the potential and prospects of CPEC, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. However, what do you think of the general policy option by the Chinese authorities on the bilateral relationship between New Delhi and Islamabad, given the tensions, the track record as such?
Well, I think China has been policy towards the relationship between India and Pakistan has been consistent, that we would like them to work together, work out their differences, and live with each other as close neighbors. After all, there is no way, I mean, to accept living in a way that as close neighbors.
You mean we are too far away from God but too close to India?
But having said that, again, we have to be careful, and we are fully aware that there are differences, there are disputes, has to be worked out, has to be managed. I think talking about the changes, talking about the prospects and potentialities of the two countries, by the way, I think one way I think that we can manage and promote by a stable relationship is through development. As we have discussed, that India has focusing very much now on development, sustainable development, inclusive development. And look at Pakistan. It is also, arguably, of course, undergoing a kind of a transition from a security or national security oriented sort of mindset towards development oriented. And that would, I would argue that will open up new opportunities for India and Pakistan to work out the differences. And that, in this particular area, China can help. And China has already helped. CPAC, BRI is an sort of initiative meant to address the development issues, and in the hope that it would prepare the ground to address some of the security. That is what the Chinese has been saying, the new security concept, the sustainable security. And of course it takes a long time, it will take a process, and it will take, of course, more talks.
Qinduo, what do you think of CPAC and its role in forging a new triangle relationship between India, China, and Pakistan? Because the CPAC has caused much of the consternation in New Delhi, and therefore they refused to send a delegation, a senior one, to attend the first BRI summit in Beijing. What do you think of the progress, if any, in fixing this problem?
I think it's understandable for, from the Chinese point of view, like why India refused to send a high-level delegation to attend like BRI, to join BRI, officially, because it has, they are concerned, legitimate concern, I would say. But CPAC was not designed to do anything negative against the India interests. It's mostly for China, Pakistan, mutual interests. Of course, for Pakistan, it's a precious opportunity. I would say once in 100 years, they need to jump on the opportunity to develop themselves, to develop the country. And for China, of course, stability, peace, and also pipeline to the Indian Ocean. That would be good for the, say, energy security, etc. But it's not targeted at India. I think India side understand that. I totally agree with Rong Ying here. Look at the three countries. Their priority, number one priority, is all development. In that sense, we have a commonality. That is, as long as we focus on development, we focus on cooperation with each other, I think ultimately we can achieve the peace and stability that will again boost our further development there.
Yes, indeed, it's a goal shared by the three players for common and co-prosperity. Let's take a closer look at diplomacy of Prime Minister Modi in the second term if he were to win. Votes are still counted at this moment. Do you think India would have to take side between Washington and Beijing?
No, it will not have to take sides, but it has specific red lines to follow. For example, if it's to build a relationship with the US, which it will continue because there's a certain momentum which has been built. Now, let's take a practical example, South China Sea. Now, if the US wants Indian naval ships to be a part of freedom patrols along the South China Sea, sorry, India will not come. You will not send. But so there are clear lines, because if India does so, then that aggravates the relationship with China. So you will do the balancing act. You can go to the Indo-Pacific to a certain extent, but not to the extent of jeopardizing. We are in a multi-vector, multipolar world. So India will do its balancing act with all the major players. But I think that's what gives hope. The economic side of it, the China-India economic track is ready to be primed up and expanded in a big way in the light of the bigger picture we just spoke of, the trade war, etc., where now the potentiality is massive, especially Mr. Modi in his initial phase. If he wants this Make in India to fly, no other country can invest except China to the level that is required to generate that mass employment which we were talking about.
Yeah.
So there are great opportunities for India and China right now, especially in the early phase of Mr. Modi's second term, assuming once again that he wins this election.
Well, very articulate about this issue. Perhaps South China Sea is too far away from India, but the Hormuz Strait is so close to the maritime states of India, where hostilities break out between the Persian state of Iran and the United States. That would be a big problem for all of the maritime powers, and India is no exception. I will see you next time. Goodbye.